If you aren't already seeing an accountant, see an accountant. If you're not
Yes.
already tracking, start tracking your personal or your business expenses and numbers. And then if you aren't already a part of the community that you're in, definitely want to jump into that so you can understand what is happening both locally, nationally, and internationally.
Welcome to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. This episode is sponsored by the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. Hi, I'm Janine Wolf, and I'm your colleague down the hall. I have a passion for helping fellow therapists get the clinical and collegial support we all need to do this work. And wow, it just keeps getting harder every day. I'm the founder and facilitator of the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. I have been a social worker for almost 30 years, and I own a successful solo online private practice. More of us than ever are practicing in solo or online practices, and we all need colleagues to process cases with, commiserate with on those really hard days, and also to celebrate our successes with. In this podcast, I'll bring you insights about trends and changes in our field and sit down with amazing therapists who are doing amazing work. We'll discuss fictionalized cases, ways to practice sustainably, and of course, there will be plenty of laughing. I love laughing with friends. I'm so glad to have you as one of my colleagues down the hall. Hello, everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Janine Wolf, joined today by Amanda Landry. Amanda is a licensed mental health counselor, certified addictions professional, national certified counselor, and private practice consultant. She's the owner of a group practice, Caring Therapist, with several locations in Florida. Caring Therapist specializes in working with children through adult, and they treat individuals, couples, and families. Amanda is the author of Guided Journal for Women with Anxiety on sale on Amazon and wherever books are sold. Amanda is trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, emotionally focused couples counseling, trauma-focused CBT, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR. Amanda specializes in treating anxiety and depression in teens and adults through a holistic and evidence-based practice. Amanda is the founder of My Private Practice Collective, an online community for therapists in private practice. She is a private practice consultant who helps solo and group practices build smart practices. And today we're going to talk about how to prepare for an economic downturn when you are a therapist in private practice. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I was going to say, you have to say My Private Practice Collective 5 times really fast to see if you can do it, because it's not easy.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes we come up with names for things at the very, very beginning, and we're just like, oh man, wish I'd known a little bit more. But I love the name. I think it describes it very well.
Thank you. Yes, it is a little long. And so is my group practice name. I've kind of talked about that on some podcasts before about it's Caring Therapist of Broward, and it's very long. And the problem is not even the URL, it's the email addresses that are attached to. Yeah. So if I were advising anybody on picking a name for their practice, if they're thinking about their email, pick it short.
I totally agree. Yes. I just named my practice my name because I never really intended to do a group practice. But I initially created my website with J Wolf LCSW because my first name is hard to spell. But then somewhere along the line, I was like, no, I think I want to use my whole name. And then didn't realize that it's going to be like Janine at JanineWolfLCSW.com. And no one can spell Janine anyway. So I don't know what I was thinking.
That's very funny. I think there's a lot of stories of group practice owners or solo practice owners like regretting their name or finding out later on like what the actual problems with their names are. So
exactly.
It's funny.
Yeah. All right. So our economy can be a little scary at times, sometimes more than others. And working in a fee-for-service field, I think for most of us in private practice, finances are in the back of our mind probably a fair amount of time. I know that comes up frequently in my consultation groups with my members, just worrying about like, okay, I had a really great month, but now I've had some cancellations and now I'm scared. And then you throw the economy on top of all that, and it really can feel like a lot.
I know I'm in, Facebook groups too. And even on Twitter, I've been seeing people like, July is slow. What do I do? Like, is it going to get busy? Is everybody else slow? What's going on? And so mental health and therapy, it's seasonal in some ways. And I think it's really important if you're looking at a smaller level, like a month to month, year to year level, it's important to note that seasonality of it for anybody that is just starting out in private practice, to know that, yes, it's going to feel sometimes like feast and famine, right? You're going to get so many phone calls and you're not going to know how to book another person. And then you're going to get cancellations and you're going to go on vacation. Then your clients go on vacation the next week. And that has been, something we've seen. One thing I can recommend that we do is we'll really follow school schedules, especially if you're in a suburban area, you work with children, or you work with the parents, or you're working in an area that's really dependent on the schooling, right? So we know when school is out, we're going to be a little slower, or our daytime appointments will fill up. And then if you're new to an area, to know about what the seasons look like there. One of our offices is in a place called Wellington, Florida. It's an equestrian community. And so we are very, very full in our community from October to about May, maybe a little bit later, November could be, but let's say October to May. And then once Memorial Day hits, everybody leaves because it is so hot here. Like it is, I don't know. It feels like 100 degrees. It's probably 95. And so everybody leaves, right? And then there's less people here. And I've had friends who work in the north where it's the same thing in the summer. They don't travel south, but they travel to the beach, or they travel to other places. And especially if you're in more affluent areas, people definitely travel over the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what I've noticed is that for therapists who were newer to private practice when the pandemic was like in the fully happening, we weren't getting those seasonal changes. And so there's therapists that started working during that time that all of a sudden are freaking out because they didn't have to plan ahead. They didn't really have to look ahead. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, like, does no one come to therapy in the summer? And it's a new experience for them.
Totally. I mean, it sounds silly, but I've been used to having to make reservations everywhere we go around here for dinner. And over the summer, it's been so slow. We haven't had to make reservations anywhere. Everywhere has availability. And I'm like, oh, because people are traveling again.
Yes.
The COVID numbers are down. Things are back to being seasonal. And so luckily, because we service so many families in the area that maybe don't travel in the same way, we have not been less busy. We've been just as busy, but the area is less busy. And our therapists have taken a lot of travel time because it makes sense. I would encourage that. My family took travel time. So it's, you have to know the area you're in. And then you have to know that your data from 20, 21, and 22 is not going to get you through 23, 24, and 25. You have to have a new data set.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, I kind of always enjoyed the summer slowdown and like around the holidays. I always took off the last 2 weeks of the year because it just isn't worth it, kind of cancellations. And I'd rather just plan ahead and have some time off with my family. And again, in the summer, that slower time, I'm like, okay, well, sometimes I would consolidate my schedule and only see clients on certain days during the summer months. But if you plan ahead for it, then you can actually enjoy the time,
Yeah. And I think one thing that I see, and I totally get it, and I understand everybody's bandwidth is different. I probably have like a higher bandwidth to see clients like in my previous life as a clinician. Now I'm a group practice owner. So my bandwidth looks way, way different, but
sure.
I really monitored those ebbs and flows. And when it was like August, September, October, I would see a lot of clients. Like if my number was 25, I'd see 28, and knowing that November, the week of Thanksgiving, is slow. And then knowing in December, it's going to be slower. Then you come back and it's like January, February, and half of March can be really busy. But then once March hits and spring break hits, it's you have some time, and then you gear up in April and May. And I would say really busy then. And then June, July, I would take vacations and I would take the time off and, enjoy the summer. And then right back to August, September, October. That can work for some people. Some people are like, I cannot see more than 15 clients a week, no matter what, no matter the flow, no matter anything. And I totally respect that. I think what brings people who can't kind of monitor that level of financial insecurity or just instability is knowing that to work more during the time when more calls are coming, and then to work less. And then my number one piece of advice for people, and I'm always surprised that even, and I get it at the solo practice level because a lot of people don't track, but especially at the group practice level, when I do consultations with people that have group practices and I'm like, well, where do you track this? And where do you keep these numbers? And they're like, nowhere. And I'm like, it would be very good for you to start tracking.
Yes.
And so even if you're a solo practice, you don't have to necessarily do these complicated tracking systems, but tracking how many calls you're getting, how many intakes you're booking, and what your revenue is every single month. And conversely, your expenses. But if we're just talking from a revenue standpoint, because then you'll know when you're getting a lot of calls, when you're booking a lot, and then what months you make more revenue. And then if you have 3 years worth of data, which I said your data from 2021, 22 isn't good, but still, we still use our data from that time to make decisions. Then you can start to plan for the next 3 years. And then, really, if there is an economic downturn, or if there's just a short-term downturn, maybe you're like, we live in South Florida again, we have hurricanes, like the months that hurricanes hit, like, forget it, people, we could be off for a week, because I don't know if you're not in a hurricane state.
I'm in Virginia Beach. So yeah, we definitely.
Oh, yes, you are. Yeah, I guess you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, the hurricane, they're like, it's Sunday, it's going to be here Friday. That whole week, everybody's panicking. I'm panicking. I totally get it. I'm not judging anybody for panicking.
Right.
I'm like I'm at Publix, like buying, potato chips that I eat all week. Like, it's just like the story of, but then the whole week is like kind of shot. And then if the hurricane does hit, then you don't know what it looks like on the other end. And then if it doesn't hit, it's like people are kind of like scrambling. And so it can be a week or two period.
Yes,
I remember a couple of years ago when a hurricane hit, and we were out for about a week, and that it was really hard to communicate with clients because you didn't have electricity. And so you couldn't really like let people know when you were up and back. And I remember people would show up to the office, like their regularly scheduled appointment, because they didn't know, but there was no, you couldn't go into your electronic health record to cancel everything.
Exactly. Yeah. We get the same thing here when we get snow, because we don't get snow very often. So we don't have the equipment for it. So it literally shuts down our whole city. And snow days, I dreaded them because literally I'd be on the phone calling clients like, okay, so today the office, we got the parking lot cleared out. So are you able to come in or not? So it's like all day long managing who's coming, who's not coming, and I over time, I was just like, that's it. If schools are closed, we're closed, period. And then everyone can just watch the news.
That's what we started to do. Like if school is closed, we absolutely follow what schools do, because then it becomes too difficult. And we have a lot of clinicians now who have children, and then to try to find daycare. The good thing about the pandemic and that, advent of telehealth everywhere is that now a lot of people will just push, have everybody go online. And I used to do that. I did telehealth before telehealth was a thing. I mean, I saw a lot of college students and a lot of people who just really like telehealth. And I remember during some hurricanes doing telehealth. I probably wouldn't be able to do that now with a little one here and be like at the door, like, hello, like what's going on?
Right.
But if you can, I would absolutely encourage people to shift over to telehealth during periods of time, not during the eye of the storms, but, if like the waiting and the before or the after, and it can be complicated. And I think like those are all kinds of things that impact the economy. So it's really important to know your local economy, your state economy, the country's economy, and like the global economy. I know it's like, it's hard to be on top of sometimes, but it's having at least some general knowledge of what's going on in the world, in your country and your state and your local community can be very helpful, because those things greatly vary depending on a lot of different factors. I would say like in South Florida right now, we really haven't seen like a recession hitting in the sense like a lot of people aren't necessarily losing their jobs. People aren't necessarily getting their houses foreclosed on. Actually, it's like the opposite, where people are still buying a lot of houses in South Florida. There's an influx of people here. And so in my mind, I'm like, Florida continues to be a place that mental health is going to be on the forefront because there aren't enough mental health providers and there are a lot of people here. And so knowing how many counselors, therapists, psychologists your state has, and then knowing the population of your state can be very helpful. And one thing that we do a lot to kind of understand is to know the population of the cities that we go into.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's important.
I am somebody who is like in the know of things economically, but not like the super intricacies of things. I have an understanding of what is going on in our community, what's going on in our state, the things that impact us like positively and negatively, and also understanding kind of like what is going on with the country, like both historically and what the predictions are. And so if you look at like historical data, recessions happen despite pandemics, despite political parties, despite external factors. I mean, that is also like a part of the ebb and flow, I think, of our economy, is that there are going to be recessions. The thing that can be helpful during a recession for mental health providers is that people will maybe feel stressed, obviously, and that they would want to seek out mental health services. So one thing I would say for people to really think about is ensuring that they're diversifying either how they get paid or who they serve or how they do therapy, right? So some people, you may, if you've never taken insurance, you might want to consider taking the highest paying insurance or taking an EAP that is really well known. If you've only worked with adults, you might want to consider, even if you don't start seeing children, maybe adding somebody to your practice that does see children. Or if you have only been doing online over the past 3 years or 3 years or so, then you would want to consider maybe going back into the office.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those are great tips. And just with this field, what I've always appreciated is the flexibility of working with adding new populations by bringing on another clinician or getting some training to see a different population of people if you're feeling burnout with the current ones. There's so many options and flexibilities we really can have in this field, especially in the private practice realm.
And that's the fantastic part. If you're getting burnt out with seeing couples, then you can go and get trained in CBT and start seeing adults with anxiety. You can start. What's great about our license, I think in all states or most states, like you really have a license to see everybody. And I try to tell my clinicians that work for me is like, if you want to get trained in something and you want more experience, we'll absolutely do this. But your license allows you to see adults, children, and everybody, and that you can really maximize that. I always found that I would see children sort of like, my day kind of was split. During the day, I would see people who had non-traditional work hours. So they were nurses, they were maybe in law enforcement, they were stay-at-home moms. They were people that worked, like college students that maybe worked, not 9 to 5. And I loved that because my days would stay full. Then 2 o'clock came and then I would see children for a few hours. And then after that, I would see a lot of couples in the evenings. And so it was really nice. I kind of had this like really good mix. And sometimes I would see more couples, sometimes I would see less children. It just kind of depended. And I found that to be really good. Even though my specialty was anxiety, I was able to see like a wide variety of people. Most of the children I saw had anxiety. Most of the people I saw during the day had anxiety. I've trained in EFT. And so I did like a lot of attachment work, but usually one partner either had an anxious attachment style or they had an anxiety disorder. And so my niche was still very much present in my day, but it was a variety. And I think that is so helpful for people that are going into private practice or wondering how to start seeing more clients if they're not necessarily getting as many clients as they want.
Yeah, absolutely. And, allowing your energy levels to dictate some of that is good too. Understanding that if you want to work with a certain population, then you might be doing nights. And if you're a night owl or you want to spend time with your child during the day and then work at night, there's lots of options. And so, I've been talking a lot about energy since the pandemic and managing our energy, because so many therapists got so burnt out with the pandemic. We brought on tons of clients not knowing how long it was going to last. And then we were all worked and overbooked and honoring that too. And so I think that those are really great tips as far as how to look at the monetary part of it, the population you're working with, your own energy level, all those things.
Yeah, and I think like looking at the energy of your business too. I think a lot of the times, and we've talked about this, like this is the therapists are not necessarily, they're not taught business, and that the
Not
business mind, I know, can be hard to turn off and on, but like also knowing the pulse and the energy of your business. Like, do you have money in savings? I think that I have been flippant in the past about having money in a business savings, because I was making enough money to like take care of myself and take care of the business and grow it, but not necessarily like have a stockpile of money. Right. And then there have been times when money has been gone to trainings or it's been gone to growth, but thinking about, again, our economy, where things are going, having a savings account, 3 to 6 months of expenses is going to be really helpful. And that's really going to depend on your particular practice. And really, like if you're a solo practitioner and you have very low expenses, you might want to save up 3 months. If you are really dependent on that income, and if that income stops and you absolutely have to pay, you have rent and you have some other, maybe have some admin support, you might want to save up closer to 6 months. And that was always daunting to me. I remember about 5 years ago, I went to a private practice kind of conference and somebody was like, save up, a very large sum of money. That for me back then, I was like, I would never be able to save that. Like, how do you even save that much money? Right. And you do it over time. Do it. I don't remember that exact figure, but I would say like having a group practice now, we have a savings account that could help float us for a period of time. If insurance payments stopped coming in, if calls stopped coming in, if a therapist or two quits, like we have enough savings. And so it's really simple advice, but I know personally that sometimes that feels daunting when you are paying yourself, you're paying your expenses, you're paying taxes, you're doing trainings, you're doing marketing, maybe you have some admin support. If there's some money left over, it might take you a long time to get to, your savings, but I would say still do it. Starting small and incremental is better than not starting at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you do profit first, don't you?
So we do like a variation of profit first. I don't keep all of the accounts, but we run our budgeting that way.
Yeah. And I think it's such a helpful perspective, because I've talked to therapists who, are anxious because they've had a lot of cancellations this week, and something as simple as, well, maybe you need to average out what a good paycheck would be for yourself. And so when you're making more money, you put that in savings. And when you're making less, you can pull from that to pay yourself. And they're like, wow, that's a great idea. Because when you're newer into private practice, and sometimes it's newer therapists, it's also overwhelming. There's so much going on. And even something as simple as that can make a big difference.
Yeah. And I've seen it both ways. I've seen where I've reviewed people's finances and I'm like, you are paying yourself way too little. Like
Oh, yes.
Like pay yourself more, like you deserve more, like you're working hard, like you're bringing in the income. Or conversely, I'm like, the owner's pays 80%. This is not going to be sustainable if you're looking to grow group practice if your taxes are more. I remember the first year, I mean, this was like in 2015, 2014, 2015. No, it must have been 2015. So, because I started in 2013. And 2013, I still had a W-2, so when the taxes came in 2014, it wasn't too bad. But in 2015, when I was pretty much almost fully in private practice and I got my tax payment was like, I was like, how am I paying for this? And what am I doing? And it, in hindsight, it wasn't an egregious amount. I have received egregious tax bills since then. And during the pandemic, when things were really going very, very well. And so it's always a plus when you get a high tax bill, because then your practice is doing well. But if it catches you off guard, it can be very scary. And I just remember that. And then from there, I really created a system to ensure that if my revenue went up, that a certain amount of money was going towards taxes, like at two ends. Like I do payroll taxes, I pay my quarterly taxes, and then I put some tax money aside just to know, just in case that tax bill comes.
Yeah. Sometimes it comes and you're like, oh, wow. Yeah. It was a better year than I thought, I guess, but I didn't really plan for it.
That's exactly like what can happen, and then you start to plan for it. And the idea is that it would even out, and that you would work with your accountant to really know, and that you would review, maybe your profit and loss, a little bit more regularly. But if you're a growing business, that can be kind of hard to do, because we added locations. Sometimes we add locations not towards the end of the year, but revenue would really go up at the end of the year because all of our offices were fully functional. And so revenue would go up a lot in the last couple of months, which means our profit would go up, which is fantastic. But then that means the tax bill goes up. Yeah. Right. So if you don't already have anybody listening, don't already have a really good accountant, that is the first person I tell people, if you are even thinking about starting, talk to an accountant, and especially if you live in a state with state income tax.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing that I found has been a hugely beneficial free resource is most areas have a small business association. And so for therapists who are trying to start a private practice, who are really scared about money, I'm like, go there. They have tons of free resources. Most of them will assign you with a free mentor. They can really help you understand, because, I've done workshops and I've said to therapists, raise your hand if you run a small business, and they don't raise their hands. And I'm like, are you in private practice? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, you run a small business. Congratulations. Now you need to learn about what to do with that.
Yeah. And what other benefits there are out there for small businesses, and grants and training opportunities. Chamber of Commerce's can be really great. Small business associations, like local chapters, can be really great. And they have a lot of information too out there about what's going on in your local economy, and being in the know with those organizations can be so great.
I agree. Absolutely. That's a challenging thing. For myself, when I went into private practice, I went into solo private practice, I just was like a deer in headlights. I had no idea what I was doing. And it's kind of a long, sordid story, but it wasn't a planned thing. I'm so thankful that it happened, but it was sort of some things were not working well at where I was working. And so I did that. And, it seems overwhelming. There can be so many things to try and figure out. And besides just getting clients in the door.
I can totally relate to not really planning on going in private practice, and even starting a group practice. It wasn't like I woke up and I'm like, let me plan this group practice. A lot of times things just happen sort of organically, or even if it's not organic, it's you're forced to do it because of your particular circumstances or situation. I think a lot of people are in that. And I think the good thing about that is that when you're so either unhappy or you're forced out of your situation, or you're just I gotta go, it kind of gives you the momentum to do it, versus if you dip your toe in and you're happy at your agency job, or you don't want to leave your paycheck, it can be hard to really take that leap because of the security.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing that I see a lot in the Facebook groups as well. There's such a wide variety of income you can make in private practice, depending on so many factors, insurance or not insurance, what population you're working with, all those different things. And so you do really need to be thinking carefully about it. I got on all the insurance panels initially, and then realized some paid next to nothing. And then I found, once I knew that, it was getting into my head in sessions, and I was shocked when I realized that. But I'm like, it can be a problem when you start looking behind the curtain and understanding more about, how insurances work and what they pay. So then I went off most of them, except for 3 that kind of match with my values and populations that I wanted to serve. And then, then you open yourself up for more private pay clients that want to come in, that specifically want to work with me, that I don't take their insurance, but they're like, okay, I want to work with you anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to, again, to know that and to really understand insurance reimbursement in your
Yes.
particular state. I've done consulting with people in other states that just have such a robust private pay market. And I'm like, that would never work where, here, because the market is just different. Some markets
Mhm.
are Medicaid heavy, private insurance heavy, or
Yeah.
private pay heavy. They're just used to paying it and they're just used to doing it, and it's a part of it. And so I think like that's really important. And again, just because wherever you are is insurance primary doesn't mean you can't build a private pay practice or that you have to take Medicaid. There are a lot of different ways to do it.
Mhm.
And I think I was going to kind of reflect on what you said. Like, I always cringe when people are like, how much money can you or do you make in private practice? Because
Yeah.
it's such like it can be a little bit like, it's definitely biased, because no one's going to go on there and say, hi, I made $30,000 last year in my private practice. I'm $20,000 in credit card debt and I'm stressed out. Like, that's
Yes.
not, it's the people that are like, I make $300,000 a year and I'm on private pay only. And I'm, in New York City and I work with, CEOs. It's like, that, and amazing. Like, yes, there's certainly markets for that. And it's so wide. You get people
Mhm.
making, a 300,000-400,000 private pay in those markets. You get people making, they're not going to share about $50,000 a year, taking Medicaid somewhere, and everything in between.
Absolutely.
And again, it depends on your tax situation, on your rent. Rent in other places is very high or can be very low. That was like one of the first things that was so shocking to me, is to learn about what people's rent was in other areas. Like, it's not like,
Oh, yeah.
I was in a mastermind like 5 years ago, and one of the women she was in Oklahoma City, and she had like I don't remember all the details, but it was like a 3 office suite for like less than $700 a month. I think I
Oh,
passed
wow.
out when I heard that. Like, I was like, that
Right.
is like you can't even get, like, I had like this box. It was no windows. It was freezing. It was a box for $700 a month. I loved my office because it was mine
Yeah.
and we did so much good work out of it, but it was literally a box. Like,
Yes.
you cannot get that in South Florida. And so that's why it's like, it's so particular and personal to where you're at, what your expenses are going to be, how much money you need to save up, what the private pay market looks like, what your insurance, what insurance carriers pay, if there's a robust EAP program. I mean, I didn't intend to, it just kind of came to this, but like, in our like thinking about our conversations today is like how location specific so much is for mental health. And
Mhm.
so you don't have to only go to mentors that are in your location, but I think it's very important to have a support system for your finances that's both local or can understand the variances based on different locations.
Yes. And now we also have, for people who do either a hybrid practice where they're in person and a virtual or only virtual, we have things like the telehealth certification that we can get through like Florida. I was like number 23 signed up with them or something. I was so
Oh, that's
excited because,
awesome.
well, yeah, in Virginia Beach, with the military community, we have a lot of people that will go back and forth between Virginia Beach and Florida. And
Makes
so
sense.
it was really nice to be able to do that. But it also, I think there's a couple more states that are now doing that. And so it does allow you to expand a little bit outside if you're in an area that doesn't, your income isn't that great. Now, of course, your expenses are going to be lower too, like you were just saying with the rent, but it is an opportunity to have access to a different market where the finances might look different.
Yeah, and then the clientele looks different, and that it really opens up. I think the counseling compact and psych pack and all of these different things are really going to change the market. I think I was thinking about
Yes.
this today. I think like my group practice will remain like a regional practice. Like, we're not, at least now, ask me like in 5 years, but like at least now we're not planning to go national, just because of a variety of different reasons. We do a lot of in-person sessions. We definitely do a lot of online therapy. We do a lot of in-person sessions. So I think that there will still be a market for those in-person mom and pop
Yep.
regional types of practices, even if they're group practices. But I do think I think it's going to be harder on therapists. It's going to be better and worse, right? And if you're a good marketer and you have a good niche and you are able to go into certain markets, you'll do very, very well. But it is only going to increase competition. I'm almost surprised sometimes at how often I see either on Facebook groups or people wanting to do consultations, and how many people are like, I want to build an online only private pay practice. And again, I think people can absolutely do it. I don't want to be a naysayer, but I think the competition for that is going to be even higher, that there's going to be some other markets and some other ways that people are really going to be able to capitalize on that. So I think the companies that are national, that can have in-person offices, are going to do very, very well once the counseling compact and everything opens up. I think there's already a lot of competition for online, and that unless you really stand out, you're going to get washed away in some of these other companies.
Yeah. And I know therapists that are trying to get licensed in as many states as they can. To me, that's a nightmare. You have to pay for your license and keep track of what everyone's different continuing ed requirements are and all that kind of stuff. I think that if you are good at marketing, you don't necessarily have to go outside of your area, except maybe in some specific circumstances. And I literally only added Florida. I don't advertise at all. I've never done any marketing for Florida. I've had people find me in Florida, but they've been military actually. But the military piece was the reason I did that, for the continuity, because it's so frustrating to be working really well with a client and they get, stationed somewhere in Florida. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I really want to keep working with you. And it's like they could be there 2 years and then be back, and maybe they would want to see me later. So I think people are jumping into this in a lot of ways with getting licensed in all these states, and not really, because then you also have to have a business license in those states and taxes.
Which they don't realize yet.
Yeah. Very complicated. It is. Yeah. I think sometimes people are looking at that as they feel like it's a marketing shortcut, because they'll get more clients if they're licensed in more states. But if people aren't finding you in those states because you're not marketing, then you haven't done yourself any favors.
I think it's going to be a unique market for people. Like, we have two clinicians. This came up in our group practice actually today. I have a clinician who is from Pennsylvania and moved here, and a clinician who's from New York and moved here. They're both licensed in those states. And so for me, that makes sense. Somebody is from Pennsylvania. They understand, again, the culture. They understand the specific things that are people going to. I think if I was working with a therapist virtually and they weren't from here, and I was like, hey, I'm running late to my session because I'm just like making this up, like $5.95 is shut down. And they're like, well, what's $5.95? Right. It's like, it makes it harder to relate. Or even things like, oh, it's like really hot today. If I have a therapist in Michigan, they're going to be like, well, it's, 50 degrees at night here. It's, that's necessarily the things you talk about in therapy. But I do think there is a benefit to being sort of like locally grown, right? And like, And so if you have a very specific, like eating disorders, that's really going to help, because there's not that many eating disorder specialists, trauma specialists, that can be very helpful. Military, I could totally see people who are already sort of like transient and going to different places. That I think it will absolutely work. I do not want to be a naysayer, but I think like just the everyday licensed mental health counselor that works with anxiety, getting in, 5 states is not going to be the best strategy, because most states have, I don't know any states that are like, we have too many therapists, please stop coming, like it's like there's usually a shortage. And I think there's a shortage like in most states. There might be some areas that are inundated, some metropolitan areas, but you can kind of spread your search out. So if I was working with somebody that was in, let's say they were in Pennsylvania and maybe Philadelphia has a lot of therapists, I would look at like, what are the pockets outside of there with populations of 100,000 people that maybe what it's like to live there, and you understand it, and focus your time and energy there. I think a lot of therapists go for the big metropolitan cities, and that there's just too much competition. We have not gone into a metropolitan city, and Florida's different because like, yes, we have Miami, but that it's like, it's not comparable to like a New York City or a Los Angeles, like in the way that it's structured. And so we find we do very well and right outside whatever our big cities are. Like we're not in West Palm Beach, which is like the city everybody knows. We're in Wellington, 20 minutes away, with 75,000 people with good jobs and private insurance and can pay for private pay. Like that's a good market for us. And so I think like being creative and not thinking you have to go into just the metropolitan market, because there are big players in most of those markets and it's kind of hard to get around them.
Absolutely. And for a well-established practice, they're going to be the go-to practice for, specific populations or things like that. That's a piece that I think people don't understand at the beginning as well, is that over time, you develop a reputation with your referral sources and with your clients. And so you start getting more word of mouth clients. And so having some sort of connection with that area is beneficial, because you want eventually to get that word of mouth referral and, not worry so much about the marketing, because you put the, obviously you're still going to do some marketing, but not as intensely as at the very beginning, because now you're getting people coming to you for different reasons.
Yeah. So I think like whatever people are thinking about, like wherever they're thinking about building their practices or however they're thinking about building their practices, like kind of to think out of the box, and not think that they have to do it like this one particular way that everybody did it. Like part of my story when I started 10 years ago is everybody that I knew was private pay. And I was actually, I feel like judged because I took insurance. And there was back then, it was like, if you took insurance, you weren't good. Like only you, that was like the tagline, like private pay therapists are better because we don't take insurance. And that was something I had to fight against, and I had to work against, and I had to educate people, other therapists, like, no, I'm just as good. I have just as much training, I have the same exact license you do. I have this personality style. I just chose to accept insurance. And now 10 years later, like I have this amazing group practice that with 50 therapists that all accept insurance, with really highly trained, good therapists. Yeah. And there are still amazing private pay only therapists. There are specialists out there. I've been to like specialist therapists paid, private pay dollars for things. Absolutely. Yes. And there are lots of insurance-based practices. So you don't have to take insurance, but you can think outside the box. You don't have to do what everybody else does just because they did it. I guess that's my metaphor. You said you were going to end with a metaphor. I guess that's my metaphor, is like, think outside of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's so good to have people like yourself. You provide so much free information in your Facebook group. And, really there's so much free learning that a new therapist can do. I mean, once I discovered the land of therapist Facebook groups, it was shocking, but also very informative. And so I learned a lot about, just so many of the big Facebook group admins do lots of free training on there. And it's so beneficial and so helpful. So your group is among those. So I appreciate that. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate your feedback. Always happy to have people. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add before we start wrapping up?
So no, I think I got through all of my mental notes that I wanted. I would just encourage you, if you aren't already seeing an accountant, see an accountant. If you're not already tracking, start tracking your personal or your business expenses and numbers. And then if you aren't already a part of the community that you're in, definitely want to jump into that so you can understand what is happening both locally, nationally, and internationally.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. That was a perfect summary of the episode. So thank you again for coming on today, Amanda. It was nice having this time together and learning from your expertise. Can you please tell the listeners where they can find out more about you, what you have to offer, connect with you, learn more about your work, all the things?
Sure. So like you mentioned, a great place is my private practice collective. We're a Facebook group, about 19,000 members. We'll probably hit 20,000 members, maybe. I'm like, what month are we in? Maybe by the end of the year, certainly. Okay. So that would be very exciting. Yeah. And then for information about consulting, it's my privatepracticecollective.com. Or if you want to learn about my group practice here in sunny South Florida, it's caringtherapistofbroward.com.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And we'll put all that information in the show notes as well. For everyone listening, there are new episodes of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast released every Thursday on all major platforms. Please remember, our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely. Thank you so much for listening to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to colleaguedownthehall.com, where you'll be able to learn more about getting the clinical support you need and resources to help you work in a supported, sustainable way. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your therapy friends and colleagues. Subscribe to the podcast, and if you love this episode, please leave a review.